Welcome to the weekly Pick and Pack, the podcast about all things inventory. Pick and Pack, powered by Fishbowl.
Welcome to the weekly Pick and Pack. My name is Nate Flake.
And Nate Fulmer here.
All right, we got a special guest today. I'll let you introduce yourself.
My name is Jason Larson. Worked here at Fishbowl Inventory for about 11 years now, going on 12.
Dang, dude. You're doubling up both of us, man. Well, that started out super somber.
Yep. Wah, wah, wah.
So Jason's a man. So what's your official title?
So I'm actually Director of Training.
Director of Training. So Jason is kind of the expert here at implementing change and getting. I know we talked about that in episode 1, but we want to talk more about kind of internal changes, right? Mm-hmm. So we have. I don't know who's listening to this, but let's assume that we have most people are interested in the SMB space, inventory, starting out to change their processes, or maybe even just to learn a couple, tips and tricks. Mm-hmm. So, this episode, I think we want to focus mostly on kind of how we've made a lot of internal changes at Fishbowl. Mm-hmm. I know you've probably been the most, between you and the director of support and some of the upper leadership and upper management, you guys have just killed it at changing a little bit of our culture, but mostly our support team and how everything is just efficient now. So we're going to start and talk about that. So before we started recording, you were telling me about how when you guys kind of launched this change, and kind of the change is like, hey, let's go from having 2 or 3 day callback times to like live calls, and you guys did it in like 6 months, probably less, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
days.
He's like, it was 12 days and 4 hours actually, Nate.
6 shifts. Trying to get away.
Yeah. So we were talking about it. So what was the first thing you guys did was just super interesting to me. You guys had everybody all the directors read a book, right?
Yeah, we did. So really the big thing about this, it was a super huge change for us, right? Because we were changing the way that things had been done for a while, and nobody believed that like actually doing live calls could be done. Yeah. With the amount of people that we had.
So hold on, before you go on, let's talk about that. How many, what's the average calls for, how many calls do we get, right, every day?
So we're usually on average between 230. Yeah. It's usually about the average amount of calls. On really high days, we'll get above 300.
So some of these calls go 2-3 hours. I've been on these calls. They go a long time.
Yeah.
So, no wonder they thought, well, yeah, good luck doing live calls. Some of these calls are taking an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Exactly.
And you're expecting me to take 8 of these, and
they were trying to avoid the call center culture too, right? Where it's you're just pounding on calls all day.
Yeah, definitely. And it was actually interesting. It's funny how our customers actually got trained during that time. Inadvertently, they were trained that when they called in, it would take a long time to get a call back. So sometimes you get people that would call in, and they would have even their assistants or somebody like that call in a couple of hours ahead of time,
not knowing,
expecting to get a call back.
They're just used to the rough callback times.
Exactly. So when we were actually able to start implementing live calls, it was really funny because you'd get people that would answer, and they'd be like, "Oh, I didn't think anyone would answer right now.
All surprised.
Can I just leave a message? I actually need to talk to someone in a few hours, if that's okay."
Can I schedule an appointment?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So what was the book? Let's get back to that. So what was the book that you guys? So you had all of your directors read this, or?
So we had directors. So the way that we're set up right now is we actually have directors and mentors, and we had both of them read it. So directors are the ones who are handling the day-to-day on the teams.
Mm-hmm.
Mentors
like a team lead,
will definitely, like a team lead. Yeah, exactly. And they will go through and they'll take care of all the day-to-days, everything that needs to happen with the teams, one-on-one interviews, different things like that, see how things are going and make sure everything's working smoothly. The mentors are more like, hey, individual people need help with certain areas or things like that, QA. They will go in and they'll do those kind of things, and anytime that the director is out, they'll fill in for them. So we had basically 2 leaders on each team. We would have each one of them, we brought together in a meeting, and really what we're trying to do is trying to make sure everybody is on board with the same idea.
Mentality.
We can actually, we can make this happen as far as the live calls are concerned. So we kind of started by first reading this book, which was Extreme Ownership, which talks about, let's not try and blame anything that ever happens like a like the fact that we don't have live calls. Let's not blame that on the fact that it's the software or it's something that's
shift the blame to somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do that. Take ownership, and it starts from the top. Starts from the leaders in the department, and then pretty soon people that are kind of your everyday regular technicians, they even take ownership for those and the individual calls. And so there was a big shift for that. And once we were able to do that, we were able to work on, okay, let's get everybody bought into this idea and let's come up with some ideas of how we can make this happen.
Yeah. So you had to get, I mean, I like what you said, you have to get everyone bought in, right? But to get buy-in, right? And that's such a buzzword that everybody throws around now. But to get buy-in, and this is applicable to not just a support team, but any marketing team, development, anything, you have to start. Yeah, parenting.
Right.
I wish I could get buy-in in my house.
Right. Buy in with my kids. Good luck.
Hey,
Anyway.
I know you can't read this book. Just toss that massive book with my 6-year-old.
Sorry, derailed it. My bad.
No, you're good. The wheels are turning over here. So you have to get buy-in from. So that's why you start. You don't just go and basically implement this on everybody and say, hey, this is what we're doing. You need to get people that are going to kind of champion this for you, right?
Exactly. And part of that, getting the buy-in is really, it kind of came from a collective idea as well of things that we could do to make this better, make it actually happen. So we would always challenge our people as well, our directors, whenever they came to us with some kind of a problem or something associated with a problem, come in with a solution. Come in with, you know what, here's a problem. I think that we could maybe solve it this way. And that included having or got those people to really own the department, own what we were doing, take pride in what we were doing, and do those kind of different things that really has pushed us to the next level, I feel like.
So speaking to that same thing where you're like coming with a solution kind of thing. So good story for you. I was at the gym one time and I was listening. I was listening to some guy on the phone because he was yelling at one of his employees. So it was really easy to listen in, but he gave me the best one-liner I've ever heard in my life. And so he was freaking out for a little while and he goes, you know what? I'm just sick of your seagull management. You just fly over everything and just shit all over it. Why don't you come to me with some solutions? And I was like, that is the best analogy I've ever heard.
Unreal.
So I use it any chance I can get, which isn't very often. So thanks for giving me that opportunity.
This is perfect time.
Anytime.
That's unreal. So part of it is also coming back to like, okay, bring me a solution. Sometimes that means changing your process though, right?
Absolutely.
So for us, that meant like, hey, this is how we take calls now. This is how we handle support tickets now. Let's change the process.
Right.
Right. And so sometimes you have to be willing, if you're running a small business, we talked about this a little bit in episode 1, but for training, we talked about this with Zach and Colby and kind of some of the training, on-site trainings, right? Like a lot of time you'll go to a company that wants to change their pick order or something like that, but they want a solution to it, but they're not willing to change in the process, right?
Right.
Hey, we're picking too slow, or it's taking forever to get the orders to the staging area. And then you come with a solution. And a lot of times, I guess, it involves changing their process, right? Like how many 100% of the time, I think. At least.
Just a rough figure.
Just a rough 100% of the time. And so I think that, but like a lot of times they're not willing to change their process.
Right.
Sometimes you have to be willing, right?
Yeah, you do. I mean, honestly, it's kind of hard to, if you run a business, and especially here where we work, it definitely is. Adaptability is key. Being able to adapt and being able to change at a moment's notice to adapt to the new expectations that are out there, or something else that's changed in the industry or the way that things are done. Being able to adapt to those things have been really crucial. And none of us have seen that more than a lot of us that go out on site and we're implementing on-site trainer. We're implementing a new system for companies. A lot of us get experience with that here. When we go out and we do that, there are people that have been doing the same thing for 20 some odd years.
Oh, those are the hardest ones to change, man.
Exactly. And I have actually on-sites completely derailed because there's, 10 people are totally bought in. They're like, this is great, this is awesome. But there's one person,
the one naysayer,
that's worked there for X amount of years. And they say, you know what? I just don't want to change. I can see that, this might be beneficial at some point, but I just really don't want to change things.
Which is why you start with this top down, right? Because if you have a director that's like bought in, if they're, I don't know what's a better name for subordinate. if their person underneath them
Yeah.
isn't bought in, then that point you say, okay, cool. You don't want to move in our direction, then there's 1,000 other companies here.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
But you can't do opposite. You can't say, hey, we're going to teach the support team, and then we have 2 directors that aren't bought in. Good luck.
Right.
You know?
Well, the interesting thing that happens, and they talk about in that book actually that I love, is it was a really interesting scenario where basically this guy is a leader of a SEAL team.
Yeah.
And he was the leader, and there's this person that came in. There was a big problem that happened out in the field. Last team that had this kind of problem basically got disbanded, and was like disgraced forever kind of a situation. They actually disbanded as far as the SEALs were concerned. So everybody was super tense about the whole situation, what was going to happen and who it was going to come down on. And so they brought in this general, I guess, that was going to come in, and they were just expecting them to just break everything up. But this guy that was the leader of the team basically just took it upon himself and said, look, it's my fault that all of this happened. It was because of poor leadership that this happened, why the timetables were wrong, why we ran into this kind of problem when we were out there. It's my fault.
Yeah, took full blame.
Even though there were individuals that were making, individual decisions or things like that, he took it upon himself as like, it's my fault because I didn't train them right, or I didn't have them set up right, or I didn't set it up for success, for them to be successful.
Yeah.
And when you have the people that are underneath that, the people that would be underneath him, they can take a look at that and realize, wow, this guy's like taking a bullet for me.
Yeah.
And he's kind of right too, like at the same time. But what about the people that are like under me as well? Like I should do the same thing. So it kind of starts this cascading effect.
Yeah, ripple effect.
And we've been able to see that a lot too, that a lot of us actually take pride in taking ownership for any type of mistake that's out there, which is that we run into or what happens. And it's really changed our mentality a lot, and has it's affected us in a very positive way.
Yeah. So what on the so I know we said the name of the book a couple times, but for those of you that don't know this, Extreme Ownership, what's the full title?
Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. It's written by Jocko Willink.
Okay. I've seen him on a couple podcasts, actually.
Really?
Jocko, yeah, he was on Theo Vaughn's
Cool.
not too long ago.
Sounds like a smart
money.
dude. Probably jacked.
He's a muscly guy, yes.
I imagine so. Was a
He
SEAL.
could beat me up.
Oh,
Is that the question?
yeah. I was just wondering.
Beat all of us
Hey, do you think he could beat you up? Oh, cool. Okay. I'm glad a Navy SEAL could beat you up. That gives me more confidence
I've
in our
seen this
country.
dude. He's money. So let's go. So you read the book. What happens next? Or you tell everybody else to read the book. You obviously read the book yourself.
Right.
And
We did it chapter by chapter, actually. So like we went through and we read it together. So everybody would read a chapter, and then we would come and discuss it.
Oh,
and,
cool.
and be like, okay,
Book
so
club.
basically like book club, exactly.
Nice.
Chapter by chapter, and then we would all discuss it and say like, okay, what was the most important part? How does it make the most sense for us in our situation, in our industry? How does this apply? And when we were able to do that, it kind of got those juices flowing. And again, it was getting people to own what we were doing.
yeah. Well, and you're getting input from them as well. You're not saying, go read this book, and then we're going to tell you exactly what you should have gotten out of it, and we're going to tell you how to think, like
Right.
what to do next. You're getting
Exactly.
kind of, that's cool.
So
you
everybody's
did
kind of
chapter
coming
by
up with these
chapter.
ideas collectively together, which causes everybody to buy into it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
sweet.
that's awesome. The involvement there is very necessary, I'd say.
So then book finishes, then what happens? How long does it take for processes to change? What major milestones did you cross?
So really with us, the big thing, it actually happened fairly quickly. And we were coming off of kind of a time when we didn't have as many people as we normally would try and have. But we did quickly go through and just change the mentality and be like, you know what? Everybody was afraid to kind of do this before, or at least a lot of the support technicians that were on the ground level were having a hard time with accepting the fact that logging in is going to be okay, because they're always worried about that queue in the background, like, oh, what's going to happen?
Yeah,
It's
this
going to build up,
backlog.
and this is never going to work. But just getting them to commit and just be like, you know what, we're going to go live, and there's only going to be like 1 or 2 people that are going to be working with those ones that are in the box, getting those taken care of, and let's do that, and we're going to see how things go. And it was almost like an overnight thing. It was really within a matter of a few weeks after doing that and getting everybody to actually do that and commit to be logged into the queue, where we started all of a sudden hitting 60, 75% live calls.
Wow.
And we're like, we never thought that was even possible.
Yeah.
And so now it's just been, going through and trying to refine that and getting the processes worked out, collectively with every one of us together.
Yeah.
Going through and collectively working that out and fine tuning that process until, I mean, today I put out our numbers for last month, and last month we had 91% live calls,
Sheesh.
which was awesome.
Yeah, for those listening, like this is like when Nate and I were, this is what, 5 years ago,
Yeah.
when we were on the
In support.
on the training and support team. It was like literally 3 days, sometimes 4 or 5 days backed up. And it's not, I mean, it's not we weren't all awful or anything. It's just the nature of the software. A lot of it was remote training that carried over. And so like you have 3 techs training. So like that's insane to go from, you know, a couple hundred in the queue waiting to get callbacks to 90% live calls.
Yeah, it was a huge shift for us.
Well, I think, and like Jason has mentioned a couple times too, like we try to keep the teams pretty small, all things considered. And it's the people taking the phone calls are the same people that are traveling. So sometimes you get booked up too much with travel, and so the teams are cut short a little bit. Like it was hard when we were on support, is what I'm saying, to keep up with all those things, I thought. But
Oh, it was crazy. Yeah, it was crazy. It was super stressful.
like you'd come in some days and it'd be like there was 2 of you on a team where there should have been 8 because of a scheduling error, and it's like, well, that's
Right.
let's fix that too.
Yeah.
But like sometimes you can't because people change when they want you there, right? So
Right.
Yeah, change plans.
you gotta do what
Exactly.
you gotta do.
There's a lot of logistical things that go into it, and to be honest, I mean, not at all to knock any previous people or leaders or anything like that have been in there. We did the best job that we felt like we could do at that time.
yeah.
We were doing great, and there was a lot of different challenges that we faced. But I think that at some point we got to the point where we could do live calls, but we didn't quite realize that we had the potential to do live calls at that point. And that's where this kind of mental shift, I guess a shift for us in process and a mental shift together as a department really made it so that it could actually come to fruition.
And I think, not like you said, not to knock on any leadership or anything like that, because obviously they did a great job. They went through a huge growth during that time period.
Absolutely.
But sometimes it does take a shift in leadership to be able to see things differently, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah,
makes
it was a big shift for us actually. Austin, is it okay if I name drop? Is that all right?
go for it.
Austin
out
Anderson.
to
You have to ask Austin.
Sorry, yeah.
We're putting it in.
Austin Anderson came in as a new leader for support, and sometimes just having fresh and new ideas that come in there can change everything.
For sure.
And I've seen that both being the person who has done something for a long time and then had somebody come in afterwards and make it awesome, you know,
Yeah.
just because of a shift like that, and then also being a part of being the person who gets to get those new ideas out there and new things that are happening. It's great.
Well, I mean, it's part of the reason why consultants are so valuable and why they're so highly paid, right? It's like
Yeah.
they have a different perspective. And
Absolutely.
a lot of times they don't even have the experience, like a ton of experience, but that's sometimes even a benefit, right? There's not like the negative view on things or whatever.
They can get outside. Yeah, they can
Yeah.
think outside on that.
Yeah,
Yep.
they just come in and basically force a change, right?
Yeah, outside perspective.
So I know we've talked about, like, you guys went through this change. You kind of changed the mentality. You're at live calls, but there's a ton of other stuff that goes into that, right? And I think that for those listening, like, if you have issues with your, you know, whether it be your inventory process or your marketing or development or whatever it is, whatever product you're doing, you know, there's a ton of other stuff that's the day-to-day. Let's talk about a couple of those things and how you guys keep, because it's one thing to make a change, but then to keep it up, right? Like you have that initial 3-week, 4-week thing,
Right.
You're killing it, but then how do you, keep the support support techs or trainers like hungry, right? And then how do you keep them knowledgeable enough to keep up with every release, to be able to train? So
Right.
I know one thing we do that's kind of unique is kind of the badge system. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually it's the brainchild. I'm going to name drop again. Brainchild of Dusty Miller, actually, who copied it from the Boy Scouts. He will claim himself that he did, but it's which is a great program. But basically, what it is we had a real need to boost the knowledge of our technicians. Our technicians were great, but it took such a long time to get to the point where you were very proficient technician. Like for me, when I first got hired on, it took me about a year before I felt like I could actually answer
Any
some of
question.
my colleagues' questions.
Oh, yeah.
And things that way. Like I could take
like
about
learning
6
another
months. I could
language.
take care of customers for the
Yeah.
most part, and kind of be self-sustaining. But to actually help some of my other colleagues and be what I would consider very knowledgeable about
Yeah.
software, it took me about a year. And we didn't really have it. We had very basic training at that point in time.
Yeah.
Most of it was just on the phones. Just get on the
You
phones.
come in new. What's the
you learn
training
it that
course?
way.
When you started, what was it?
When I started,
6
it was
weeks?
Becky's Cookies. There was no training course
just
even
threw
at
you
all.
in.
Just
it
throw you
was
on the phone.
It was Becky's Cookies was the database that we went through and looked at. They had when I was lucky enough to actually get some training videos, so I watched those for like a half a day, and then I
Welcome.
would,
Dude, we had like
and then we
6
went
weeks.
Oh, we had
through-
way too long.
We had 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, Fishbowl's like not an easy product. I mean, it's
No,
easy.
no.
It's to where the end user you can train them.
right.
It's easy to us now, but it's like learning QuickBooks.
It is.
Well,
yeah.
it's like-
well enough to be like a QB Pro advisor or something crazy. You know.
I think like what you were saying, Jason, like you can regurgitate the information for a little while. You can kind of fake it, but then you actually have to have some in-depth knowledge to actually be able to speak intelligently to it,
make
right?
recommendations.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's wild.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Because I remember feeling that and like going through those issues where it was like, oh, I've dealt with this issue before. I can walk you through it. But then it was like, oh, why did this happen? And it was like my brain just like shut down. I was like, why are you asking me that? I don't know.
Just mute. Yeah,
Just don't do it next
Put
time.
them on mute. Ask
Yeah,
your
that's so
director.
true.
Oh, yeah.
Let me
Come
check
here,
into
come
that for you.
Yeah.
So you had
Why
half a
does
day
this
of
happen?
video. So you were like good to go. at
Half a
that
day of
point.
videos, and then I shadowed someone on the phones for a day. And
Okay.
that was Anthony actually.
Nice.
Anthony, man.
Okay.
Shadowed them for a day, and then we were thrown on the phones. Which literally
crazy.
I would be like on the phones, and somebody would call in and be like, "Hey, my Fishbowl to QuickBooks sync isn't working." I'd be like, "Okay, let me check on that. Just 1 second, please."
Oh yeah.
Put them on hold and look over at Luke and be like, "Luke,
Your director.
we integrate with QuickBooks?"
There's this thing
What's
called
QuickBooks?
QuickFish. What is it?
What's QuickBooks?
So that's what it
What's-
was like for me.
What's
when
the
I first
training
came
course
on.
now? Like, is it?
So that's gone through several
you're ahead of it, man.
several
So
kind
where
of
are we at? Where are we
changes
at
and
now?
things that have happened there, and it's been through. That was back in the days of Dusty Miller.
Yeah.
The badge program was his. Also going through and changing the training program.
So now they watch videos for a full day and do zero shadowing and just jump right into it.
Just jump into it. No, so we started out with 8 weeks of training.
Mm-hmm.
It was trimmed it down to 6 weeks of training, and then eventually down to 4.
Perfect.
And this last group we did 3. So we kind of keep
Dang.
pushing it a little bit more and more there.
I came in during an 8-week stretch, and I felt like it was
We were
like
6,
it
I
was long, too long to the point where it was not helpful because it was like it was the same information that you're getting, but there's not like real life experience or
Yeah, just
exposure
give
to
me
it,
on the
right?
phones.
Yeah.
Right. So we try and with that training program, which is really awesome, by the way. We do
Well, you
4
made it,
weeks
right?
is ideal. No, I didn't
Like
make it.
super
Honk
good.
honk.
I'm standing on the shoulders of greater men, but what we do, it's really awesome. We bring them in and we will give them just a water hose effect for probably 4 days, which can be pretty overwhelming. And then after that, then we will that's where they get basically everything there is to know with Fishbowl in that short period of time, which is just a brief crash course on everything. Then we will circle back and go into great detail. We encourage a lot of questions as far as what we go through and do there. We give a lot of scenarios, like here's what you're going to run into this way. We spend a lot of time on that's learning the software, and then we spend time troubleshooting where we actually challenge them to put their troubleshooting skills to the test. So I'll create different scenarios for them.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, I broke this, fix it. Have them
Yeah.
go do that. A lot of hands-on, like
that's
actually
awesome.
learning there that way. And then we go out and we do a tour of companies that use Fishbowl, try and give them some information that way.
I like too that you have different directors coming through and helping teach as well, because
We
that
do.
way you're not getting the exact same voice that entire 3 or 4 weeks that you're doing now, right? It's like, or the same mode of teaching even. It's like you get a different perspective. You get someone that's actually still taking quite a few calls. You still, so I like that you guys do that too. I think that's really helpful.
We actually make it a point when we go through and do the fire hose days. We'll train on certain topics, and then we make sure that it's a different trainer who trains on that topic again.
Oh, cool.
Because that way you'll kind of get two
Different
different perspectives on
sweet.
the same thing.
Tracks that.
So you go through the training. So now coming back to the badges. So you do the training. Let's say trainers are here for 2 years. How do they not become stagnant? How do they progress, right? Like how do they keep learning?
Right.
That's through the badge system. So speak a little bit about that. So
absolutely.
Brainchild Dusty.
Brainchild Dusty, yeah, he came up with it. Basically, there are badges that are he calls them achievements actually,
Yeah.
but they're achievements that are based off of milestones that you hit. So that's like
Okay.
number of years that you have in the company,
Yep.
number of calls that you take in a day, number of calls that you take in a week.
Yeah,
certain
some
things
fun
like
ones that are like, hey,
Mhm.
you can get these in a week if you try really hard.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then there are other ones which are coursework, which means it's about 4 hours a badge. And basically what happens is we have a whole bunch of different kinds of topics.
Yeah.
Some that are more common topics to Fishbowl, like accounting. Everybody needs to know accounting if you're
Yeah.
going to use Fishbowl.
To a very limited extent.
So
I'll put a little disclaimer there.
to a limited extent. Yes, that's true.
I don't know
So
how to get into QuickBooks, but not
but
touch
we will
anything
go
else.
through. We have QuickBooks. We have 2 QuickBooks badges.
Zero.
Zero, yep. We have troubleshooting badges. We have a lot of things that are kind of like you need to know these things, or these are very basic things. So they
Excel.
get
Project
kind of more in-depth.
management.
And then you've got some more obscure ones, which are like Linux, or
Yeah.
like how to install things and how to handle Linux, how to I'm trying to think of
Like the
other one.
hardware badges where it's like scanning and how to
Hardware,
troubleshoot those.
database, how the database is set up, SQL, how to write SQL queries and do all those
Yeah.
kind of different things. So there's a wide range of topics that they can go through and cover, but it makes them someone who goes through and gets all of those badges would be a very valuable
Super
technician
skilled
for
technician.
us.
How many? There's like 8. How many badges are like over 100?
So coursework badges were probably up around like 60, 70s on those, but then there's a whole bunch of milestones and things
Got
like
it.
that.
So
that
someone
people
that's
do as
been
well.
here for 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming they get, because you want them to get what is it, like 2 badges a month?
2
or
badges a
something?
month, yeah. And so
That's
the
what you
way
encourage
what
them to get.
happens with this is it's actually tied to how much they make, so they can actually get a
So it's incentivizing
raise.
to them.
Yep,
Yeah.
everybody starts off in basically the same pay when you get started here, and then what happens is for every 12 badges that you earn, you'll actually get a 50-cent raise.
Yeah.
50-cent hourly raise, and you'll get up to $2 total. So if you get 48 badges, you'll get a $2
And you
raise.
can do that
total.
as soon as you want. So for them, it's incentivizing not only for pay, but to like actually learn and become a better trainer, which then puts them in position to kind of move up in the company as far as directors or mentors, right? Or
Absolutely.
hop teams or whatever that is.
Well, and to
Yeah.
that same end, it shows the leadership as well, who's really motivated or like who wants to grow in the company, right? Or who's
Yeah.
actually like putting in
Who's
the time.
invested? Yeah.
Absolutely. And even for those people that don't, that are just kind of, because there still are a few people that end up being stagnant. I mean, it happens.
Yeah, they're happy. They're like, this is great.
But the cool thing is that we actually go around and we'll be like, okay, so if you were on track and you had your badges that you'd normally earn right now, here's how much money you're losing because you missed out on this on this raise.
And that just
And
lights
they're
a
like,
fire a little bit.
Oh man, I gotta get those badges.
Don't tell my wife.
yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
So
Talking about kind of incentives as well. What other, besides like upward mobility, does that help with retention? I know we spoke a little bit about that before we started recording. Like what's our retention? So our turnover is like insanely low, right?
yeah, it's very low. Most of the time, at least for the support department, majority of the time we're losing people because they're going to other departments. They're moving
Yeah.
on to different positions or things like that, like development or marketing or sales. They're moving on to that. But I mean, it's very low as far as actually losing someone externally.
Yeah, especially for like a call center training type environment. I mean, we're in Utah, right? So it's Silicon Slopes.
Yep.
Everybody has these support and training teams, but we have to have like one of the lowest. In
I would
the state,
say
I would think.
from what I've seen, it's like 2 to 3 people a year.
That's
Is
insane.
like average where we'd be at. Yeah, there's not a whole lot.
And you attribute that to what? What do you think? Besides,
Well-
because people are investing so much time getting these badges, you think, or
So
a lot of it's probably culture,
there's
fun
a
place to work.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of things. So Fishbowl does take care of people really well as far as pay is concerned, and that includes those badges. For me, one of the things that's kept me here forever is that it's not something that I become stagnant at. There's always something to do, whether that be something with the badges, and then once you get beyond those badges, then you've got kind of leadership and different things that you can go
Yeah.
through there where you're participating, coming up with ideas, doing all those different things. Plus, day to day, the stuff that you run into with such a really complex software or capable software
Yeah.
is there's new problems that you run into all the time with
Yeah.
certain industries and so many different industries that we work with. So that's been really huge for me to not feel stagnant
Yeah.
Because I feel like, honestly, and maybe that's a bad thing to say on here, but I would probably be a job hopper if I worked anywhere else. I would be one of those people that would just, after a couple of years,
do it.
I'd get bored and be like, you know what, I want something else to challenge me.
Yeah.
But I'm challenged
even
every
here,
day.
even here in Utah, I read something on LinkedIn the other day that was like the average tenure for a millennial in the Silicon Slopes is like 22 months.
Really? Yeah.
Wow.
Right, because people are just going from company
Job
to
to job.
company. I mean, they're all, it's all software, mostly software companies, right? So, I mean, but even for those people listening, like this isn't just applicable to software. Like
Absolutely.
if you're running a company that sells shoes and you're trying to figure out, hey, how do I lower the turnover? Challenge your employees, right? Like give them something to learn and give them something else to do. Add more. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people get, as soon as they start to feel stagnant, that's when they're either looking for a promotion.
Yep.
Promotion's not there. They're bouncing companies.
They're out.
Right.
Yep, exactly.
So I think maybe that's part of why Fishbowl, because we've had partners in here, Nate and I, where people are like stunned at how low the turnover is.
Yeah. Like the fact
You
that
know.
you've been here 11 years, even and the company hasn't been around much longer than that, frankly.
I was only going to be here for 1 year. That's
the
originally what
plan?
I agreed when I sat down with
Oh,
Dusty
really?
at the time. I sat down and agreed with him, and I said,
I'll
I would
give you
love
a
to work
year.
here, but I am going to work here for a year, and I'm going to head back home to Idaho where my family's at.
I'm a wild stallion. You can't tie me down, baby.
And then,
Oh, wild stallion.
then, Fishbowl just took such good care of me. You can tell that they care so much
Yeah.
about their people, and the people that work here are just, that's the thing that just keeps you. you know?
Yeah.
That's funny because when I was being interviewed, I didn't say the same thing, but I said something similar where I just said I have a couple of years, but I do plan on going to grad school at some point. And you could just, like, there was no hesitation with their response. Even it was like, okay, which now I'm thinking back on it, it's
Joke's
probably
on
like
you, bro.
yeah, okay, we'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going anywhere,
I'm so
sucker.
sure.
It is kind of like that. It's like, okay, great. Yeah, 1 year. We'll see.
Yeah.
I broke free, but now I'm back.
Yeah, circles back.
So what advice do you have kind of going through? So you kind of start this whole change. You, Austin, a couple other people make the kind of this plan. We're going to read this book. We're going to make these changes. We're going to go live. We're going to implement this badge system that was already implemented before. Culture, turnover's low. Like everything seems to be working.
Yeah.
Right. What do you suggest for somebody that's not in the software space, that isn't, maybe they're not even in the services space? How do you keep employees, especially for those like that have your same position, that are directors of training, the people that the onboarding specialists in a lot of other companies is right. Like if they're not learning a software, let's say they're, either manufacturing, which a ton of our clients do manufacturing. How do you keep people hungry? How do you keep people attentive? How do you keep them progressing?
So
From your experience of what you've learned here?
my experience and from what I've had with the people that I've worked with is, number one would be being honest with them and open, and anything that you ever are doing or talking about with them, but then challenging them, figuring out a way to actually challenge them every day. Whether that's actually what I've seen and I've observed from being on a lot of different teams and being on teams where I was happy and excited and I loved it and I thought it was awesome, and other teams where there just was missing something that was magic that was there.
Yeah.
It's because there was people on those teams that would challenge all of us. And it wasn't even, I can think of one team in particular.
Challenge in a good way?
Challenge in a good way.
Okay.
Not even like...
Not challenge like, I'm just going to try not to punch this guy in the face today.
No. Challenge in a way. So, for instance, there was one guy that was, his name is Chris Williamson. Sorry, name dropping. Again.
No, you're good.
I can't help myself. Anyway.
Shout out to Chris.
He
Hopefully
came in.
listens to this.
He came in on one of the teams that I actually was the director of, and he changed the dynamic on that team a lot. I learned a lot from him.
Yeah.
Because he would come in and he'd sit down and he'd be like, "Hey guys, I'm working on some emails. How many emails do you think I can do? Oh, I'm going to do this many. Let's see. What about you guys? You think you could do this?
Yeah.
Think
Like
you could
made
do
it a
as many
competition
emails?"
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that.
He made it really fun, and he would do that every day with calls and emails or whatever he was doing.
I remember that actually. I was on Chris's team for a while.
Yeah.
That's
And
cool.
he was awesome at doing that, and he would really lift people up, and I loved having him on the team. I never wanted to lose him because he created an atmosphere on the team that was, hey, we're doing this together, and we're having fun doing it together, and we're challenging each other and pushing each other up.
I like
Yeah.
that.
So keep it challenging for not only the employee but also whoever's in that director or management position.
Yeah.
Is also challenging their, the employees as well.
Exactly. I mean, like if something comes up where it's like, hey, we got this kind of problem, challenge them to see who can come up with the best solution.
Yeah.
Something I remember too when I first started is like basically you're given leadership's trust until you lose it, basically, right? So like it's up to you to lose that trust. Like we don't have any machines here to clock in. You don't have scheduled break times. You don't have like shifts for lunch. Well, there's kind of like try to make it shifts for lunch or whatever, but if you go during a different time, it's not like anyone freaks out at you. You know what I mean? Like you don't get written up for a warning because you go at a different time for lunch or whatever. Or like there's at least a way to like work around it, right? Whereas there were a lot of other jobs that I had where it was like clock in, and if you clock in 5 minutes early, then you're in trouble because we're paying you 5 minutes longer than you need to be paid, but clock in 5 minutes late and you're fired because you're late. So, and like, make sure you're clocking out for your break and 15-minute break. Oh, you're supposed to take your 15-minute break at 10, but you took it at 9:30 instead. Like, there was never that issue. And I feel like that was a big deal to me, that I didn't feel like I was being micromanaged in every aspect of my life.
You don't have your anxiety stricken.
Yeah, right.
You come in.
Especially when you're like taking phone calls and stuff all day. Like, it's like, no, I need to get off the call now because I have my 15-minute break right now. And if I don't take it right now, then I'm not going to be able to take it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know.
I've definitely been to companies that not like. I mean, I guess I've worked for a couple like that, but when implementing fishbowl and training, like you can instantly tell the culture as soon as you get there. And this isn't an episode about culture or whatever, but like it's crazy.
Kind of turning into that.
It's crazy how. Yeah, you can instantly just like you can tell like, oh, this place is like very micromanaged.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean maybe if you're trying to implement change, start with like, hey, loosen the reins a little bit, like don't be so crazy, because especially like you're talking about bringing all the directors in, having them read this book. Every chapter we're going to have a meeting about it, and then we're going to implement a kind of a crazy, like a whole new concept of taking calls, and we're going to go from a queue style to a live call style. If previous to that you'd micromanage everybody and everybody was super used to a very strict set of processes, do you think it would have been a lot harder to make that change?
I think it would have been.
Because the mentality is already very, this is how it's done, this is how it's always been.
Right.
But because the mentality's not, right?
I think that, wouldn't have been as positive as a change as it's been, because you wouldn't have people that are buying in. They're not really doing it. They're just doing what they're told. They're not actually being a part of what's going on.
Yeah, being a part of the change.
And it's such a, being micromanaging like that, I mean, that's the reason why people stick around here, I feel like, for that long, is because of the culture and because they're not micromanaged. So honestly, I don't know that you start to have to immediately shift over to, okay, let's compartmentalize all of in our particular situation with support, we like being a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
This one technician can solve all of your problems. Whereas if that would have happened and we would have been super micromanaging, that's where, in my mind, that's where you start getting a lot of the turnover with your employees. So if you start getting a lot of turnover, then all of a sudden you don't have people that are going to be buying in, and we would have had to have split out and done compartmentalized everything out, and then we've got unhappy people that we're turning through probably every 7-8 months.
Yeah.
And it's just not worth it for us at that point.
Yeah, and you're probably in kind of the whole mentality of like, okay, if you're gonna be strict with me, then like you're talking about being a one-stop shop for the trainer. I could see it kind of turning and actually biting you in the ass, where they're like, hey, if you want to be strict with me, then I only do this and this and this. That's my job description.
Exactly.
Anything beyond that, good luck. Like I'm not going to go out of my way to do something that's technically not my job description.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, down in, we get emails all the time, people going above and beyond here.
Absolutely.
Right. And like, if you're listening to this and you have employees that are going above and beyond, it's probably because you give them the trust and the kind of freedom and creative freedom to solve issues.
You've empowered them to make them feel like they can do that. Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. Like I think companies that think they're like, hey, well, if they're so worried about the bottom line that it's such an inverse effect for them, when it's like it's actually like costing you a lot of money to be an asshole.
It's true. Well, and one of the things that's interesting as you bring that up, going through and talking about, like, back in the day, we used to be a lot more strict on things. Like, we had these things called incidents, which we used to go through, and the customer could only have 10 minutes of the time, and then it would be, it was really, nobody loved it, but we used it. And that was another kind of mentality shift, is we took those away. And one of the things that Austin, when he came on, was really big about was like, I just take care of the customer, even if it's like for a different department at Fishbowl.
Yeah,
take care of them first, and then we'll work on like, where do they need to go? How do we help them get to the right place the next time? And that changed it from, this isn't part of my job.
Yeah,
I don't have to bother with this. I can pass them off to somebody else. And then there's kind of that whole fight between, okay, who's taking it and who's.
Yeah.
That's that whole, like, is it Zappos that has like the awesome customer service that everyone like refers to when they're talking about good customer service? Where like there's like this story, I don't even know where I heard this or if it's true or not, but where like a professor's talking about customer service and like how important it is. So he calls Zappos and says, "Where's the best place to order pizza here?" And instead of being like, "Why the hell are you calling us? This is not my job." The guy like Googles it and is like, "Oh, it looks like this gets the best reviews. So yeah, go ahead and call this pizza place." Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome.
We've actually had people, because we have another there's another company out there that's Fishbowl Marketing, and we get calls every once in a while about coupons to, restaurants.
Yeah.
Golden
it's a
Corral,
software.
things like that. And there's people now that are like, "Oh yeah, so here's what you need to do. You need to go to this place. Here's the website. Go to this one.
Yeah.
You accidentally came to ours. Here's the right one, and do it that one."
That's awesome.
We need some rev share with those guys.
Yeah, seriously.
That's awesome. So final advice, final thoughts, top 3 pieces of advice from the process you've gone through, because this is probably a 2-year process it took.
Yeah.
I mean, it took several weeks, and then what is the final process? What is the final tips as far as process done? 2-3 years go by. What are your big tips for the people listening? Anyone going through any type of process change?
The biggest thing that I would say is, don't be afraid to actually make the change. Like, I know that's kind of hard, but really being afraid to make the change, things are never going to get better if you're afraid to make the change there. And then getting people to actually buy into that change, making people part of that process, encouraging them, like the people that you're working with, working together and collaborating with them and making them feel like they're a big part of it to actually implement and have that change, so that they basically, if something, if it goes right, then it's everybody's fault. If it goes wrong, it's everybody's fault. And then we pick up the pieces and then continue working on something else to make it better.
Over it.
Have everybody take ownership is really huge for that. Those are kind of the biggest things.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jason. Well, we're going to leave you with an inventory tip here. So we're going to talk about best practice for creating part numbers. So I actually got this question all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
I did too.
People. So we're talking about like part and product numbers, right? So companies, either startups or people who have already been selling product or manufacturing a certain product, and then they implement a solution like Fishbowl. And one of the first questions I always get is, "Hey, how do I start? Like, I'm starting fresh. I'm wiping my. We're going to start with a brand new QuickBooks file. We're going to start with a brand new Fishbowl file. What's your advice on creating part number system?" So best advice I always says was like, "Hey, keep it simple." People try to overthink it.
There's the people that overthink it, and then there's the people that don't think about it at all.
Underthink it.
And so there's like a fine line. Yeah.
Yeah. So best practice is something between 5 and 7 digits. Not starting with zeros. A lot of people start with zeros. It screws up a lot of things, and it just makes it confusing, especially with order entry, right? And then the other additional tidbit that goes with that is, if you're a manufacturer, or if you're working with manufacturers, just remember that most manufacturing solutions separate their internal part number from the vendor part number. So if you're ordering something from a manufacturer or vice versa, you sell something to a vendor and you're a manufacturer, just make sure you don't screw those up, right? Because a lot of that'll make or break a big project. So anyways, that's your tidbit. Thanks, Jason, so much for being on. You're awesome.
Yeah, no problem.
Appreciate having you,
Happy
man.
to be here.
Jason's
It's always good to
money.
see you.
We didn't talk enough about how cool he is. He's probably one of the smartest guys at Fishbowl. I go to him for
On the planet, I dare say.
yeah. Sean's not
Not
here to
even
fact check.
exaggerating.
Sean's not here to fact check.
You
that,
guys
so
are
we're gonna
too
let it roll.
kind.
That is true.
So, anyway, subscribe to the podcast. We are on all the major platforms, and yeah, we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.